All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I would like to call this hearing to order. Today, we will be discussing Complete Streets policies. Complete streets are roadways that are designed, implemented, and operated and maintained in an equitable and context-sensitive manner so that people of all ages, incomes, and abilities can use them safely. In the spring, my office, alongside the Department of Public Service, sat down with transit and mobility advocates to hear their concerns. We heard clearly that residents wanted to know more about the city's Complete Streets policy. MORPC, Complete Streets Policy, or the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, just so folks know what that acronym means, was updated this year to emphasize balancing safety and mobility for all users. Part of the policy update included revising the design section to reference the latest federal regulations, standards regarding required and recommended street design manuals. Before I turn it over to, we have a couple presentations today. I wanted to ensure that everyone was on the same page. Today's hearing is really an update. And so many times when we hold hearings, we're holding them because there's an action that will immediately follow the hearing. So that means that there's proposed legislation that is coming, there is some other sort of action. At this juncture, this is a time to educate the public on what is happening with Complete Streets. You will hear during the presentation the role that the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning, this is why it's called MORPC, Planning Commission, the work that they are doing, the role that they have in really helping to coordinate this for the region, because this is obviously, whenever it comes to roadways, it is a integrated network. So similar when we talk about Link Us that goes through several municipalities, this is not only our roads that we are talking about, but these are the roads in the region. And so while MORPC is playing the role of organizing what the plan looks like, then Columbus is part of implementing the plan on our roadways. So I wanted to ensure that folks understood at this juncture there is no proposed legislation, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. So having said that and having that out there for the sake of clarity, I will also say, I think, again, hearing from our advocates and looking at other municipalities, other cities across the country, this is really a roadmap for how we think about safety, how we think about how we are really bringing all Vision Zero and all of our other efforts to ensure that our most vulnerable roadway users, pedestrians, cyclists, are safe on our roads. But obviously, when we do that, that ensures that everyone is safe on our roads. And so I'm excited about the conversation today, and I'm excited to share this with the public. There are some folks that, whether you are entering this and hearing about Complete Streets for the very first time, I hope that you find this informative. And for our folks who understand what the policy looks like, have some familiarity with the policy, that hopefully they will learn more about what we are doing and then hopefully implementing. So with that, I am excited to hand over the floor to our partners at MORPC, who will be providing us with an overview of the Complete Streets policy and the approach that our region is taking. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to our folks. If you could also, this might be in your introduction, but just also give us a little bit of background of MORPC and the role that they play in the region. So Joe Garrity, I will give the floor to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member, and for the opportunity for the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission.
Is your mic on by chance?
I believe it is. There we
go.
I just need to lean in a little bit. Thank you, Council Member, for your leadership. Again, I am Joe Garrity. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Community Relations at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. And excited to be here today to present on Complete Streets. Prior to turning it over to my colleague Parag Agrawal on Complete Streets, we're going to do a very quick level set. I also want to recognize the leadership of Councilmember Lourdes Barroso Padilla. She serves as chair of our Public Policy Committee and is also our newly appointed member to our executive committee as well. And so this is a critical leadership position in our 15-county region.
Thank you.
So I will, let's see, get the slides. Oh, there we go. So who we are. We are a 15-county region of 89 different local governments advocating with one voice. And so MORPC is very much a regional convener, and we're here to provide different and diverse services to our local governments. So you'll see here in our map, in Franklin County, in Delaware County, and portions of Union, Licking, and Fairfield County is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. That's a designation from the United States Department of Transportation, where we help provide key dollars and are that regional resource to help our local governments fund transportation projects and plan out long-term to 2050 and beyond. You'll also see there's a C around that Metropolitan Planning Organization where we provide the Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization, or CORPO, where we provide similar services to the rural portions of the region. We always start with our values, our strategic framework. We want to pay it forward, serving the next generation of public servants. We want to drive investment to Central Ohio. We want to build value for our local government members and create an environment for prosperity. So much of what we discuss in our region is about growth. And I know many folks attended a discussion earlier this week where we had the 3C mayors, and the opportunity of our region and some of the challenges that we face as a region is that we're growing. We're going to be a region of 3.1 million people by 2050. But we always say, as we grow bigger, we need to grow better. And so some of the big moves that we're really focused on right now from a public service and transportation perspective are passenger rail. And so we have the 3CD corridor, which is being led by the Ohio Rail Development Commission. We have the Midwest Connect corridor that MORPC is working on in partnership with Fort Wayne on, that would connect Chicago, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. We recently formed a committee and are in step one of the Federal Rail Administration process to reconnect intercity passenger rail back to Central Ohio. Columbus has not had intercity passenger rail since 1979. And then, of course, Link Us. We had exciting news yesterday kicking off our transit supportive infrastructure, which will be critical. Of course, bus rapid transit, when we're looking at the first 3 routes on West Broad, East Main, and the Northeast corridors, transit supportive infrastructure is going to be transformative to our region, where 27.5% of the new potential levy, if passed by COTA, could have a huge impact in funding 83 different projects in the COTA service area. Of those 83 projects, 23 would be focused in the city of Columbus. We're talking about better trails, better sidewalks, 150 miles of new trails and sidewalks by 2030. And then again, we also help advocate on the region. Yes, Councilmember.
Mr. Garrity,
Yes.
before you move on,
Yep.
Because we made the announcement yesterday about the projects, and you may not have this at the ready, but at some point we can go back around. There is a website where folks can see what the projects
Yes.
are, and there is public commentary on the projects for a time period. Can you just share, if folks are watching or if they want to go back and watch this, where can they see the projects and how do they comment?
Is, I believe, morpc.org/more sidewalks.
Great.
Yes, so we really encourage folks to visit it, to not only learn about these 83 projects, but to also provide their input.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then we also provide advocacy through the leadership of our Regional Policy Roundtable and facilitate a group called the Columbus Region Coalition, which focuses on trying to bring strategic investment back to the region, whether we're advocating to the United States Department of Transportation on key projects like the Linden Green Line, or looking at other critical opportunities and going on curiosity trips to other states to learn how do they do good bus rapid transit, how do they do good passenger rail. And council member, as you know, safety is a critical portion of that. Unfortunately, we witnessed a fatality which changed our plans when we were trying to take passenger rail and transitioning to bus rapid transit. So this is a critical priority, not only in our work, but also in our advocacy. And then lastly, we have a Drive investment portal. We have a historic amount of funding at the federal level, and we want to be a key resource to our members. A lot of our communities don't have the bandwidth to compete for these competitive funds, so we have a Drive investment portal and also provide a resource on Money Mondays where we try to dive in a little bit deeper on key competitive grants in the region. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Parag Agrawal, who serves as our Chief Mobility and Infrastructure Officer, to dive a little bit deeper on Complete Streets and the role that MORPC plays.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, City Council member. I am Parag Agrawal, and I serve as a Chief Mobility and Infrastructure Officer and Senior Director of Programming at MORPC. And in this position, I basically manage the transportation planning, land use, and economic development functions of the agency. As Joe mentioned, I would also like to thank you for inviting MORPC here today to discuss our Complete Street policy. A big thank you to our partners in the Department of Public Service in City of Columbus for working with us on a host of issues. I also have with me our Program Manager of Safety, Lauren Cardoni. Again, she is a big champion of safety in the Central Ohio region. Again, thanks, Lauren, for all your work. So I have a small PowerPoint presentation, and we would like to talk to you about how critical safety is for Central Ohio residents. So as we know, MORPC serves as the MPO, that's the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Central Ohio region, which includes primarily Franklin County and Delaware counties. And we have something called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that basically puts together the vision of transportation investments in the Central Ohio region. And through transportation planning, we are not only talking about roads and bridges, we are talking about how we can create sustainable neighborhoods in our communities. We are talking about economic development. We are talking about natural preservation of our historical landmarks. So again, when we talk about transportation, it's basically building communities. It's basically enhancing communities for our residents to live in. Moving on, what are complete streets? So again, this is a big definition, but again, complete streets basically means streets are not only meant for cars, streets are meant for all road users. When I say all road users means pedestrians, bicyclists, people who are using transit, and also vehicles. As Columbus is part of the Midwest, Midwest is known for auto-centric communities, but thanks to the work of City of Columbus and many other communities in Central Ohio region, we are changing the culture to make sure that our streets are meant for all road users. What are the benefits of complete streets? Why are we even talking about complete streets today? As we can say, the number one benefit of complete streets, it's safety. It helps to have a safe pedestrian network. So number one, it's safety. It also talks about health. So it's not only about safety, it's about health, because it encourages physical activity. Then we are talking about environment, because one of the largest emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, comes from our transportation sector. So if we can encourage more pedestrian network, we are trying to improve our environment. It's about economic development. That is the key. Data has shown complete streets always try to encourage more jobs and more job retention. So it's about economic development. And the last and not the least, it's about social interaction. So again, as you can see, complete street is basically very necessary for enhancing our communities. It's not only a transportation issue, it's a social issue, it's a health issue, it's an economic development issue. As I mentioned, MORPC, working with many other communities in Central Ohio, we are doing a lot to make our streets safer for our pedestrians and for all road users. But unfortunately, if you look at our data of number of fatalities in the last 10 years, these are number of fatalities in our MPO planning area. When I say the MPO planning area, I'm talking about the Franklin County and the Delaware counties primarily. And again, the number of fatalities are going up. It's not unique to Central Ohio. Nationally, if you see, the numbers are going in a wrong direction. So therefore, we have to work more closely with all road users to make our streets much more safe. If you look at the pie chart on the right-hand side, number of pedestrians are much more impacted by these number of fatalities. Then around 22% of all roadway fatalities are basically pedestrians. Moving on, how does Columbus relate with the MPO planning area? This slide basically shows the comparison of the MPO fatalities and the fatalities which are within the city of Columbus. If you look at around 55% of MPO's population is city of Columbus. But as you can see, in some years, the number of fatalities are more than that 55%. So again, we have to do a much better job to keep our residents much safer. At this point, I will also add disadvantaged communities are much more impacted because of these fatality numbers. If you look at the neighborhoods, it's basically the minority community, the people of lower income. They are much more impacted by roadway fatalities because they are the ones who are basically using transit much more. In their neighborhoods, we do not see many sidewalks and trails. So historically, if you look at the data, it's our disadvantaged communities are unfortunately getting impacted because of our roadway fatalities much more than the general population. So complete street policy. We talked about complete streets. We talked about number of fatalities. So what is a complete street policy? So again, I will say complete street policy, it's not only a document which the planners and engineers put together by themselves. A complete street policy is a formal process of incorporating the most appropriate design elements into our roadway projects. We are basically asking our planners and designers to routinely design and operate the entire right-of-way to provide safe access for all road users. So again, it's the entire process. We need to have a leadership champions for our complete street policy to be successful. It's a process, not only a document which sits on the shelf. Complete street policies in our Ohio region. I will say that City of Columbus is one of the leaders in complete streets and trying to make our roads safe for all pedestrians. If you look at the first complete street policy, the resolution was approved by the Columbus City Council in 2008 that basically talks about to express support of complete street principles. We have City of Cincinnati that got a buy-in. We have City of Cleveland that got a buy-in. And there are many other communities in Central Ohio. I think there are 18 other communities in Central Ohio that has adopted the complete street policies. So what does MOPSI do? We do have a complete street policy of MOPSI, and we basically make sure the attributable funds of MOPSI, the projects which are getting the attributable funds, they have to comply with the MOPSI complete street policy. But we do understand each community is unique. So we work with each and every community of Central Ohio to custom-made and tailor-made complete street policies which is suited to their communities. That is the key. So it's not like MOPSI has a complete street policy and we are trying to create a blanket policy for the entire region. Every community is unique, and we are working with each and every community to make sure the streets are safe for all road users. So in a few months back, couple of months back, MOPSI Commission updated our complete street policy based on the feedback which we were receiving from our member communities. The update which we did a couple of months back made sure that our streets will be much more safer for our community residents. This slide basically talks about some of the elements of that update. Number one, this update will make our complete street policy implementation much more transparent. So we have a reporting requirement now. So any project which is getting attributable funds of MORPSI, they have to comply with complete streets. But initially, there were no reporting requirement. But now we have to report the progress of the complete street policy implementation to our various citizen committees. So that is the key. We also included something called the safe systems approach, which is basically a federal designation, which is the federal principles, how the local communities can make our streets much safer. What does this safe systems approach do? We basically focus on fatalities and serious injuries. So we are trying to prevent fatalities and serious injuries through our update of the complete street policy. That is the key. We also made sure that any attributable funds which are going to the communities, they have to complete with the MORPSI complete street policy. That's the key. So I will say it's a policy, but we do have teeth. We do make sure that it gets implemented. And we look forward to working with City of Columbus and all our communities to make our streets much safer for all road users in the coming years. Joe also mentioned about TSI, which is part of the LinkUs. We are basically looking...
Can you just say what TSI stands for folks?
Again, it's about more sidewalks and trails. A transit supportive infrastructure, which is basically creating more sidewalks and trails to make sure that there's easy access from communities to our transit stops. We are talking about 500 miles of sidewalks and trails that will be implemented through the LinkUs initiative. Again, this will help to make our communities much safer, especially our disadvantaged communities much safer for years to come. So Madam City Council Member, this was the end of my presentation. I will be happy to take any questions about complete streets, attributable funding, and any other questions you have.
I do have a couple questions. When you talk about the complete streets policy being suited to those to communities, right? Can you break that down? What does that look like? Why? What are some of those adjustments? If you could give clear examples as to why we would want to essentially take what feels like a systemic approach and, make alterations to it, if you will.
Definitely. As I mentioned, City Council Member, each and every community is unique. They have each and every land use issues, separate land use issues. There are some communities where the industrial sector is much prominent as compared to the housing sector. There are some communities in which the housing sector is much more prominent than the commercial sector. We talk about speed. Again, generally, the higher the speed, the unsafe the streets are. So we basically work with each and every community to identify the primary intersections and the corridors, which are prone to more accidents, right? And then we basically look at the land uses which are surrounding those corridors. We look at the issues because of which you have these accidents taking place. Generally, in terms of safety, we have 3 E's. We talk about 3 E's. 3 E's stands for education, engineering, and enforcement, right? 3 legs of the stool. 3 E's. And when we are talking about different communities, the 3 E's will be very different from community to community. The type of education that will work in City of Columbus might not work for City of Hilliard. So again, you have to tailor-make your 3 E's accordingly to suit the needs of the community.
And are we seeing the complete streets model being adopted in more of the larger municipalities? Or are we seeing it in smaller? Are we seeing it in rural areas? What are some of when we look at our region, who's kind of buying into complete streets?
So I will say complete streets. So recently, because of this bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's a program called Safe Streets Roads for All, SS4A. And MORPSI perhaps is one of the only MPOs in the country that received 3 federal awards through the Safe Streets Roads for All. What the Safe Streets Roads for All does, it basically gives you federal money to develop a Vision Zero plan. So I will say there is an increased push of federal and state partners for complete streets, for Vision Zero plans, and because of that, larger smaller, and the rural communities, they're all working together to develop Vision Zero plans. So recently, MOPSI developed a Vision Zero plan for the Corpo communities. Corpo stands for Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization, which is basically 7 counties surrounding the MPO area, which are much more rural and suburban communities, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm very proud to say that although we can do much more work, but Central Ohio communities are working closely together to make our streets safer.
And when you talked about the accountability, is it just, I have 2 questions. Is the accountability that MORPSI is looking at, is that if you are getting funds essentially for Complete Streets, and then what does that accountability look like? Like how are you following up with cities?
Yes, so it's about transparency, right? As I mentioned, the communities which are receiving attributable funds. Attributable funds are basically the MPO designated funds which we use to give to our member communities to make our communities much better. We have around $48 million annually. So again, the communities which are receiving these attributable funds, they are required to follow our MOPSI Complete Street policy. Initially, we didn't have any transparency, right? So again, there's a policy, you have to follow it. But again, because of the new update that was done a couple of months back, thanks to the MOPSI staff, now we also have a reporting requirement that the MPO staff basically have to report to our Community Advisory Committee and Transportation Advisory Committee to say, okay, MOPSI gave out our attributable funds to these communities, and these communities are following the Complete Street policy in this way. So it's much more transparent, right? It's not only about you have a Complete Street policy and you are saying they should follow and no one is following up on. So there's much more transparency and accountability moving forward.
And does Columbus currently have attributable funding?
Yes, so it's hard to say, right? So again, as I mentioned...
It needs an acronym as well.
Yes. So as I initially mentioned, we work very closely with the Department of Public Service of City of Columbus. So I will say that right now, so I have my notes in front of me. Currently, there are 17 projects led by City of Columbus which have outstanding commitments of MOPSI attributable funds. 17 projects which have outstanding commitments of MOPSI attributable funds, which total around $110 million for the next 5 years. If you talk about some of the major projects, which are like East Broad Street widening, I'm talking about the Olentangy Trail extension. We are talking about the Dublin-Granville Road, multiple intersections on the Dublin-Granville Road. So we do work very closely with City of Columbus on our attributable funding program. And we had a recent deadline on July 19th for the attributable funding cycle. And in this July 19th deadline, we received 7 applications from City of Columbus. Out of the total of 22 applications we received. So out of 22 applications, 7 new applications were submitted by City of Columbus. And again, we look forward to working with City of Columbus to see how we can implement our MOPSI Complete Street policies.
And then 2 last questions, and then we will move over to our friends at Public Service. My other question is just around the revisions to the current, which we saw a little bit in here, but can you just drill down a little bit more about the added criteria for evaluation around vulnerable road user safety? And how does that look different than our previous Complete Streets policy?
Yes, so I will basically, as initially mentioned, these roadway fatalities impact our most vulnerable road users much more than others. It is basically the disadvantaged communities who get impacted the most. So our goal is to work with our communities to make sure that our vulnerable communities are getting proper investments. So for number 1, as I mentioned, there's accountability and transparency. So I will talk about one project for which City of Columbus has recently applied for attributable funding. And that project is basically phase 1 of the Gender Road project. Again, if you look at the phase 1 of Gender Road, it's basically the southeast part of Columbus that can use more investments, right? So again, this is one of the, thanks to City of Columbus staff, we work very closely to make sure how can we make our disadvantaged communities much safer for all road users.
And it is my understanding that before we roll out this version, I think there is a point of order for MORPC essentially to adopt this. Has that happened yet, or is that in process?
Yes, ma'am. So City of MOPSI Commission has adopted the complete street policy already, the update.
Okay.
So we had a comment period. We worked very closely with all the communities to develop the policy for the last 18 months. Based on the feedback which we received, the MOPSI Commission has adopted the updated policy, and based on our new attributable funding round, we will be implementing our policy.
And when was that adopted?
June, I think June of last month, this year.
And I wanted to highlight that because part of the timing of obviously Columbus adopting or moving towards any sort of action was because we were waiting for the adoption from MORPC that essentially says this is the plan that we are holding folks accountable to and that we'll be working with municipalities on in terms of the accountability, in terms of the funding, and then from there municipalities, you know, the City of Columbus would then look at that policy, and then we would begin to make either whatever sort of adaptations we would need to make because it would suit our streets or the projects that we are looking at in particular. That's fair to say, yes?
Yes, City Council member, and we will be working with the City of Columbus and all our member jurisdictions on the updated complete street policy, MOPSI updated complete street policy, and to see how we can further implement to make sure how our streets are much safe.
Great. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for that presentation. It was very thorough. I always appreciate the support of MORPC. I'm honored to chair the policy roundtable, and I know that as we are talking about, actually this week I was in a political leadership program where we had folks from all over the state, and the amount of times that we talked about bike paths, and it doesn't matter if you're in a municipality of 500 to 1,000 people that they want connectivity to the next local, you know, jurisdiction or metro park that is in their area, or larger municipalities. I mean, this is something that folks want. And so we talked about, I mean, it was probably housing and transportation. I know that's on everyone's bingo card. It was certainly on ours this week as we talked about, you know, some of the most pressing issues around the state of Ohio. And so, and I know that as we talk about policy, Vision Zero is part of our, is one of the planks of the policies around for MORPC in the region to ensure that we have safe streets for all, that we have, that we are all adopting parts of Vision Zero, especially for, I mean, there's cities that have one stoplight who are looking at Vision Zero and thinking about Vision Zero again, because if you have one stoplight, that means many people are using that one stoplight. And so making the roads safer for all it has been critically important. So thank you. Okay, we are going to move along to our friends at Public Service. And then from there, we're going to move to public commentary. We do have five or seven folks who have signed up for public commentary, and then we did receive some virtually. I also wanted to say thank you to our residents, and thank you to the folks who are here. The city still has ongoing technical issues, and so I hope that folks did not find it too hard to get a hold of us. We do have a healthy crowd here. I know this was also a tough time during the day, so I appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to be here with us, or the folks that took time to send in the testimony. We are reviewing all of it and sharing it both with our partners who are here today. So I just wanted to put that out there. Also, we got started a little late, and that's also due to our technical issues. There might be a delay that's going up on the screen. It is fun to live analog. So with that, I am excited to introduce, who's starting? Great. So I am going to hand it over to Catherine Swardarski. I always just use the the acronym for your name, who is our Vision Zero Columbus coordinator from the Department of Public Service, to kick us off.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. And yes, feel free to call me SWID. I'm our Vision Zero coordinator for Columbus. And actually, as we were putting this presentation together and thinking about the information that was going to be presented today, if you don't mind, I'm just going to share a little bit of personal connection. So when I was writing beginning my PhD program about 10 years ago, part of my interest was in policy and policy support for active transportation programs for our most vulnerable age group, our youngest residents, and specifically in the Safe Routes to School program, if any of you are familiar. And I had done that work around the country before moving here to Ohio and to Columbus. So part of my dissertation research was a policy scan looking at supportive language. Do places have complete streets? Do they have policy in place that supports the programs that we're trying to fund and the improvements we're trying to make on the roadways? So admittedly, very excited to now be here as a staff member at the City of Columbus, at the Department of Public Service, to be contributing to this public engagement and this research, this information gathering to bring forward a local policy for complete streets here in Columbus. So just a very exciting moment across all levels of government in what we're seeing support for our most vulnerable users to have a safe space on our roadways. So with that, thank you. There's been a lot of change since I was beginning that program at The Ohio State University during my PhD, and since the beginning of our Complete Streets in Columbus. There we go.
Can you move closer to the mic? Just because then that way folks at home who are watching can also hear.
Sure. Thank you. So 16 years ago, as mentioned, this month, it was when Council adopted our Complete Streets policy here in Columbus, or our Complete Streets resolution, excuse me, as you heard in Morpsey's presentation, and that expressed the support for complete streets in Columbus and those principles on our city's roadways. Since then, there has been a lot of change, and Morpsey described a lot of that, the evolution of the standards at different levels, the guidelines, the expectations of how roadways will look. So what roadways looked like back in 2008 is much different now, and the expectation is much different now. So we are evolving here in Columbus to incorporate those changes and those standards, and our approach is evolving similar to what has been described by Morpsey. One of the significant commitments that we've made was in joining NACTO, our National Association of City Transportation Officials, and that membership has given us access to resources across the country, fellow engineers and planners who are doing similar work or who are leading the way in that work for those lessons to come here to us in Columbus and not stay isolated in those locations. A lot of lessons to be learned from, as you shared, communities large and small, rural and urban, because everybody is having this opportunity, as we discussed, the Safe Streets and Roads for All, these opportunities to try new materials, new ways of engaging with the public, and we are doing that same movement here in Columbus, being more collaborative as a department, as a city than ever before, as a region with Link Us and Zone In, and as you mentioned, the roadway network doesn't end at the end of the jurisdiction, so that collaboration is very important to how we continue this momentum and moving forward in the steps that we're taking. I also want to point out on here, Connect Columbus, our multimodal thoroughfare plan, was really when the Columbus design memo work began. And those design memos are the iterative, ongoing dialogue of how we get people to really build the way that we want them to build. It's a set of standards you can point to for this is how the work should be done, ensuring that those principles of Vision Zero and Complete Streets are incorporated. Currently in progress, our Bike Plus plan, which has helped us again to take even more steps forward in how we're collaboratively designing roadways, shifting power outside of city government and to our public for more involvement, more input, more ownership in what we see as a result in the way that our roadways are designed. So we're very excited for MORPC now having adopted a complete streets policy to use that in moving our local policy forward. So I wanted to point out a couple of things. I know that we are in design with our local policy. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight, that there is a framework also provided by the National Complete Streets Coalition and Smart Growth America, and they annually score and rank the policies that are developed by different jurisdictions. And of those elements that make up a comprehensive complete streets policy, these are 4 that I wanted to call out as examples of how Columbus is currently adhering, if you will, to those elements of the policy. So MORPC had already been describing how we are prioritizing and looking for putting investment in place in our communities that have historically been underserved, and investments have been less. So we have our high injury network, that's the HIN, and our communities of interest, that's the COI that you see, and that is how Columbus is prioritizing those areas where we have more vulnerable road users with maybe different access or fewer choices as to how they're going to move around the Columbus community, and making sure that they get what they need sooner than communities that already have a better developed network. I just described a little bit about design memos. We'll talk more about that as we go through some specific examples, but that mandates the coordination so that external contractors who are doing work in Columbus, our internal teams, this gives them the set of guidelines to look to. Our zone-in, redoing our city code has been a major overhaul, and the way that land use and transportation fit together is really going to influence a transformative experience for our roadway design, along with Link Us and other initiatives that have been described. And the last thing I wanted to highlight, of course, for my own Vision Zero initiative, the measures of progress. And so there was mention of transparency and making the data and the accountability in place so that we know that we are really doing what we've written in the policy to do. So we are looking at the data, we are looking at where investments are taking place. Are we having an impact on the number of fatal and severe injury crashes? Are we having an impact on the number of severe and fatal injury crashes for our pedestrians, for our bike riders, for our oldest, for our youngest, for our individuals with disabilities? So looking at those data, reporting on those data annually, and making sure that we are supporting that progress towards zero.
Can I just add one thing, Swid? If you could go back 2 slides, actually. So I want to reiterate that I will introduce myself. Brian Ashworth, Department of Public Service, Transportation and Planning Manager. I didn't write a dissertation as Swid did, but I do feel a personal connection to the roadways as a single car household and riding with my kids daily. So I want to emphasize how we have been iterative in our planning process. So we had the resolution in 2008. Each of these steps has built upon the last. No single community figured out what a complete street was in 2008 and has been doing it successfully. It's been an iterative process for every community. Each place has a learning experience. As Parag and Joe pointed out, there is no one complete street. Whether you're in Columbus or San Diego or Paris, there is no one complete street. So it is very specific to what your land uses are, what your travel speeds are. And I just wanted to highlight, we didn't even show Link Us on this timeline, but, that's something that's been building for almost 10 years at this point, and has been called Link Us for the last 5 years. So I just wanted to emphasize that we have been making complete streets decisions for over a decade, even though we might not have the complete street policy in place. Parag pointed out the 17 projects in the next 5 years. That doesn't even quantify the last 10 years of projects that have qualified for that attributable funding and we've been working towards. So I just want to emphasize that we have been working on that. Vision Zero, Link Us, Bike Plus, all these planning initiatives could not run if there was not a complete street that allowed us to walk. So I just wanted to highlight that we have been doing this work, even though we might not have been calling it complete streets at every step of the way. Yes, I can keep going for you. Okay, just a couple examples. So I think there's two main things that I wanted to highlight here today. So there's kind of two approaches that we can take to, or we have been taking to complete streets. The attributable funding program that MORPC runs, it's on a transportation timeline, we'll say. So even the applications that he mentioned, those funds don't get dispersed for until 2031 per se. So we, as DPS officials and Vision Zero coordinators, want to make sure that our streets are safe today, in July of 2024. We can't be waiting to make improvements when the funding becomes available. So Sullivan example is one place where we've taken shorter term tactics to improve safety by improving intersections, making crosswalks safer, reducing speeds reducing vehicular travel speeds by adding things like medians and others to really reduce not only the number of crashes, but the severity of crashes and the amount of speeding that occurs on corridors. So we've done this in a couple locations. Mount Vernon at Champion is another example where there was extremely wide roadways, which just promotes speeding. It makes it easier for you to travel faster if there's not something near your car. People are very scared of scratching their car. So wanting to make sure that we're limiting that. So in this example at Mount Vernon and Champion, it was just simple striping and some reboundable posts that made the intersection not only narrower for the vehicular driver to have to traverse through, but as you can see that image on the right, it actually takes away almost 20 feet of pavement that a pedestrian has to cross to get across an intersection. Another example, and I'll go back here in a second, so apologies for the flipping around, but East Broad Street is an example that is the exact same situation. What is currently a 70-foot wide roadway with 6 travel lanes and a center turn lane, it's extremely dangerous to cross. I also ride on this corridor, and it doesn't feel safe per se. And because of the number of lanes of travel and the lower volume of traffic, it just encourages folks to drive faster, making it a more unsafe experience. Almost all of the examples that we have shown here today do show up on the high injury network, or the HIN that Swid mentioned earlier. So, that's just one of the data points that we use is the HIN. We focus in on our communities of interest, the HIN, travel speeds, and so forth. But all of those are being considered in addition to what I mentioned earlier with land uses and our Vision Zero, or our Bike Plus Vision network as well. So that Broad Street is just one example of how we collaborated with someone like MORPC on the Safe Streets for All grant application to be able to make short-term changes that will in fact or eventually inform longer-term solutions. So we don't want to wait for Broad Street to change until we need to make repairs or an ODOT resurfacing comes up. We want to make changes in the near term to make our streets safer today. So I'm going to go back just a little bit, and apologies again for the jumping. These are just a few that we came up with in a few minutes about what are the current projects that I feel have complete streets elements in them, many of which have been funded through MORPC or federal models like Livingston Avenue, again, a Safe Streets for All award winner. Livingston Avenue will go from a 4-lane section and 2 travel lanes in each direction down to a 3-lane cross section. West Broad and the BRT or the Bus Rapid Transit along the Link Us corridor and East Broad both are premier examples of what a complete streets facility looks like by having premium rapid transit, bike infrastructure and protected bike infrastructure at that, and pedestrian access to all of those facilities. I feel that is a premium complete streets example. Mount Vernon is another. I showed the example of Mount Vernon and Champion as being a short-term solution. We even just last week had a public meeting to share designs for what Mount Vernon will look like in the coming years, making that transformation more permanent than the paint and bollards that we have out there today. Hudson, 4th Street, East Main with the Linkus, Phoebus and South High, both looking at being more quick build or quicker turnaround improvements to what we see out there today, are just some of the examples of how we are incorporating complete streets into our work. So I mentioned Livingston, as you can see there in the roadway itself, going to a 3-lane section, so 1 travel lane in each direction, and a median or a turn lane depending on where you're at. But most importantly, adding pedestrian and bike infrastructure in a separated instance. So here you can see that the bike path is raised from the roadway, but also separated from the pedestrian path itself. This allows for a facility that's safe for all ages and abilities. So
What section of Livingston Avenue is this?
this is just a typical section, so I don't have an exact cross section for you.
I'm sorry, I meant
sorry.
where's it going to go?
Great question. Yeah, 18th to Nelson. Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
And I only mention that because if folks are familiar, we did road dieting on Livingston Avenue on the other part of Livingston. And so obviously this could not go there.
Right, yeah.
So I wanted and Livingston is obviously a very long street. So I wanted folks to be able to visualize where this would potentially go.
Thank you for the clarification. And just to hammer the point home, Livingston east of College, in partnership with Bexley, has already done some short-term improvements to just change the striping and has already seen significant reductions in speeds in that corridor. Again, we'll see a longer-term solution, but even by just us changing the striping has made significant improvements. What I want to point out on this Livingston example and Bike Plus, I think has maybe said, well, I can't say it too much, but Bike Plus is for all users, whether you're myself or Swid who rides daily, or the person who doesn't call themselves a cyclist and has to ride to work because they have no other option. That's who Bike Plus is for, and that is, I think, what this design shows. We're not asking all folks to ride in the travel lane with just sharrows. I think we can do better, or we need to do better. This provides a facility that is for all ages and abilities. So my wife or my 7-year-old would feel much more comfortable on that than they would on Livingston today, for example. West Broad is, again, the Linkus corridor. This is just one example of a station along the West Broad corridor. But as you can see here, we have separated bike facilities, bus-only lanes, and safer crossings for pedestrians. I do want to point out, you'll see on the left that we as a city, I think, are committed to making those protections even stronger than what they are now. So it won't just be paint, but we are committed to making that a more protected facility for, again, those all ages and ability riders.
And this is the corridor, the Linkus corridor would go from downtown further west.
Further west, yeah,
Yes.
That's correct. So at least to Wilson would have something that looks like this. It is our goal to even beyond Wilson to provide bike facilities via a shared use path or something. Shared use path being a facility type that both bikes and walkers could use, but would be separated from the roadway itself. And I mentioned East Broad. So we flew through a lot of projects. I hope that we hit the point that we as DPS are committed, as Department of Public Service are committed to complete streets. Even, we don't necessarily call that in our day-to-day work, but it is foundational to all of our work. It is Vision Zero, it is Linkus, it is Bike Plus. I feel really committed to that. I think by us taking steps to have a complete streets policy within DPS, we're formalizing what our design process and what our design memos have already started to and have been working on for almost a decade.
So my first question is, I want to stay there for just a second. What would the difference look like? What does adoption look like of the policy? Like when I look back at that slide that Cleveland and Cincinnati actually had like a code change. We just did a resolution. You mentioned that we had been using bits and pieces of Complete Streets, but if we actually adopt a policy, how would that be different than our current approach, and what would that look like?
So, as I mentioned before, we have so many projects that continue to go through the attributable funds process. We already follow all of the MORPC guidelines for Complete Streets. So really, we are drafting a policy for the City of Columbus and DPS that would mimic many of the Complete Streets guidelines and policies that we would be putting into our own city bulletin that would basically give us the rules and regulations to be able to follow what the MORPC Complete Streets guidelines say, and really just reinforce what has already been set forth by the Regional Planning Commission.
And when we think about our Complete Streets strategy, so we have Vision Zero, we have a high injury network, we have Complete Streets. How do these all interact with each other in terms of our decision making and our strategy for making streets safer for all?
There is a lot to consider when we design roadways, it turns out. Whether it is prioritization on how and when we select which roadways to improve, or what type of facilities go in each. It's always a balancing act. As I mentioned earlier, there is no one complete street. South High Street is going to look different than Lozelle Road, outside of the city. So there is no one complete street. It is important for us to consider, even right up front, what does our high injury network look like? I mentioned that with East Broad, that roadway it's not safe today. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. It's not safe today. Our high injury network tells us that, and we know that we need to make changes for our vulnerable road users.
And is it safe to say that some of these policies, I feel like feels like a very stage-planted question as the chair of Public Service and Transportation, who talks about LinkUs on a daily basis, but it feels as if a lot of these strategies are already kind of baked into LinkUs on those main corridors. While those corridors are long, and again, for folks, if you're not familiar, it is West Broad Street from downtown up through Prairie Township. It is East Main Street from downtown all the way down to Reynoldsburg. The third is the Northwest Corridor along Olentangy, and it's essentially done in 3 phases. The other 2 are the ones that we're still exploring. That's my LinkUs commercial for the day. Probably many more to come.
For the hour.
But it feels as if a lot of these policies and a lot of these strategies are already baked in because of the bus rapid transit system that's coming in. But when we think about going back to that high injury network where there are main arterial streets, I think about the things around me, James Road, Livingston Avenue, the other parts of Livingston. We could go on Morse Road. We could go on, right, naming these streets. Where is that in our prioritization? And is it fair to say that some of this is, again, baked into LinkUs?
It definitely is baked into LinkUs. One of the slides that Parag showed earlier was the Safe Systems approach. That's created by FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, who is also funding LinkUs from the top. So even as the trickle down, we are providing FHWA with designs that they're approving. And then, so that's kind of the top end. At the bottom end, we as a city are committed to our vulnerable road users and our Vision Zero. We've been committed to that. We have a second version of that plan out already. So we are also committed from the bottom to provide those safe systems approach designs. Again, we might not call it safe systems approach in our day-to-day work, but are always considering how we are designing for and planning for our vulnerable road user.
Could it be said that because of the resources that are coming with LinkUs, right, that we're putting towards, aside from the infrastructure dollars, right, that we know are coming in, that could help us then focus on some of those other arterial roads or some of those other safety projects, because we're pulling down federal funds, or even thinking about our capital budget, the quick fix, our office, we put aside a significant amount for some of these quick fix projects. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, I mean, transit supportive infrastructure projects. McNaughton Road is a good example of that. It's a 2-lane road now that we've had a fatality in recent years. It connects to a school and neighborhoods. One of our transit supportive infrastructure projects for the city is adding a shared use path along McNaughton Road to make that safer. Full stop. To make it safer for those residents and for those students. Yes, it's fair to say. McNaughton Road was, I think, the most pointed example of that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for answering those questions. I want to also ensure that, again, I think we have a healthy list of public speakers. I'm sure that there will be other questions that will come from them. And I know our folks who are here, I saw them taking notes, so there might be some things from the presentation that they want to also follow up on. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and move to public commentary. Lourdes Barroso de Padilla deeply expresses her regret if I mispronounce your name. I have the feeling, I had a fear, as soon as I saw your whole name, the fear of I'm going to mispronounce this hit me, so blame it on the head and not the heart. So I'm going to go down our list, and Chet Ritnor, who really I should know this. Stevie, you are on deck. It's just when you're unsure of yourself that you get it wrong. It's really what it is.
It's Chet Ridenauer, like you.
Thank you. And for all of our speakers, if you could introduce yourself and then any affiliation that you may have. And you do have 3 minutes, just so that we can be fair to all of our speakers. We're having some microphone troubles.
Is this on? Check 1, 2. No. Do I press the button?
Yeah, it's on. The green light is on.
Hello. Check 1, 2.
Chet, if you want to project for now, and then we'll just to keep us moving.
Yeah. My name's Chet Ridenauer. Like you ride on a bike for an hour. When I worked for Car2Go, I'd say like you ride in a car for an hour. Good afternoon, Councilmember Barroso de Padilla. It is great to be with you today and speak in favor of an updated complete streets policy in Columbus. I am a member of Yay Bikes, proudly sporting one of our Bike to Sea Bus jerseys. I'm on the board of directors and here to speak on behalf of our members and those that ride bikes both for transportation and recreation in Columbus. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Let's keep going. We're
Check.
gonna phone a friend for help.
Our mission at Yay Bikes is to help people ride bikes in the road conditions that exist today and improve the conditions that will exist tomorrow. We know that in Central Ohio, over 60% of people are interested in making some trip by bike that they're currently making by car. These bike-curious folks often cite some barrier, most often safe, comfortable, and convenient transportation infrastructure, as the reason they're not riding. Yay Bikes supports Complete Streets as a critical tool to rebalance the right to and use of the public right-of-way and ensure that streets are designed to adequately meet the needs of all users, especially those traveling by foot, bike, or public transit. Complete Streets offers a set of policies and design guidelines to ensure that when a roadway or corridor is designed or redesigned, those tasked with designing the street must adhere to certain minimum standards of facilities for all users, especially those known as vulnerable road users. Depending on the width, speed, and vehicle volume of the road, it could mean a sidewalk, bike lanes, and enhanced pedestrian crossings, are warranted to ensure the street is accessible to all. Updating Columbus's Complete Streets policy to align with MORPC's revised policy and include updated best practices will ensure that the changes we want to see in our city's roadways are carried forward as a matter of policy. It will also support other important transportation initiatives in Columbus, such as Vision Zero, the effort to eliminate serious and fatal crashes, and Bike Plus, the city's bike planning process that is currently underway. But more importantly, adoption of a robust Complete Streets policy sends a signal that Columbus cares about mobility and every person that utilizes its streets, no matter their mode of transportation. Yay Bikes is in full support of the city's Complete Streets policy and urges its swift adoption. Yay Bikes looks forward to working with you and city staff to advance this and other initiatives that support biking for transportation in Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you, Chet. And just so folks know, if you're watching from home, they could see it because we can see that it is your speech was on the screen. So I just wanted to assure folks that they could still hear. So you can come on down. And then on deck, we have Jared Cape. Is Jared Cape here? Jared's not here. After Jared, Kyle Campbell, you're next. The floor is yours.
All right, hello. Oh, this one works. All right. My name is Stevie Pasamonte, and I'm a lifelong public transit rider, the child of a disabled veteran who is unable to drive, and the current board chair of Transit Columbus. Back in February, many of our volunteers, friends, family, and community members attended a city council meeting after yet another bicyclist was killed on a Columbus street. This bicyclist, like many others who have been hurt or killed in our city, was not a Lycra-wearing athlete. He was not a Pelotonia rider or a recreational mountain biker. He was just a regular person who was trying to get where he needed to go, and he happened to be doing that on a bicycle. When we came here to council, it was to urge the city to move quickly to protect people like him, to prevent the same thing from happening to you, to me, to any of us. What you don't see between our visits to council are all of the people who show up to Transit Columbus meetings month after month who are tired and frustrated and scared. They're parents who worry about their kids playing outside. They're students who are harassed by impatient drivers on their way to class. They're low-income folks whose neighborhoods aren't built for walkability, even though they're less likely to have a car. They're workers who are tired and stressed out by traffic on their way to and from their jobs. They are people who just want to be able to sit on their porch without inhaling car fumes or raising their voice over the constant sound of cars and traffic. And they're people who can't make it to 2 p.m. public hearing on a workday. As a city, we talk a lot about safety. Usually it's in the context of crime. But car crashes are one of the leading causes of injury and death for people under 40. Most of the streets in our city were built to allow cars to move quickly at speeds that would severely injure or kill anyone they struck. They were not built for people to be able to live and move about safely and freely. A complete street is one that is designed for all road users, including people who walk, bike, roll, or use a mobility device. And so one of our primary asks that day in February was that the city adopt a complete streets policy that would require us to create streets that keep people safe. We're grateful to be here today, hopefully one step closer to doing just that. Adopting a complete streets policy is just the beginning. This would affect all projects moving forward, but we still urge the city to implement those quick build measures that we saw in the short term to stem the crisis of violence and death at the hands of dangerous street design. In the long term, well, this is going to take a lot of work, as you all know. And so it is our hope that the city intends to continue to increase the resources and capacity of the Department of Public Service in order for them to be able to do the work that we're asking them to do here today. Our city is growing, and if we're going to get ahead of that growth, we need to build now, we need to build quickly. We are in support of adopting a complete streets policy. So thank you, council members of MORPC and DPS for hearing all of us out back then and today and for taking action. We look forward to what's ahead.
So First, I want to say thank you for your work with Transit Columbus. I want to thank the members of Transit Columbus for continuing to put pressure on us. I think one of the aha moments for me is actually, I think, in the advocacy, not just of Transit Columbus, but also all of our transit advocates that, we often talk about with pay equity, for example, right? That we need to create equity within the system, right, when the system doesn't allow for it. And so it was a moment for me when I think we were having a conversation, it might have even been in a testimony, that it's not just about changing the minds and hearts of people, right? That's the hardest work, but it's just the same way we need to change systems, our roadways, our systems, that there are things that we can be doing to make them safer. So even if people don't change, right, their behaviors, even if it is that day when you are, you're distracted by your kids in the car, you're tired, you're frustrated, that when I don't always, in a split second, I may make a decision that is life or death, that there is a system that makes it safe for me and safe for the people on the road with me. And that was certainly a turning point for me in my thinking, so I want to thank you for that. And I think, in the continued conversations with public service, we've had conversations about this, even when we think about, many times folks will come to us and say, what does enforcement look like? We're starting to get into other conversations around safety and what does that look like? And also, if you get that ticket, now you're in a system, right? And if you can't pay for that ticket, what does that look like? And it causes all kinds of other problems for folks. And so how are we thinking about all of these issues? And so again, I just want to say thank you for your advocacy. I do feel like we are one step closer. I also look at, even Brian and Swid being here today, who are cyclists themselves, who are folks who use our roads in different ways and that are advocating, much like when we think about our motivation as to why we do this work, it is not just because we want it for the greater good, it's also because we want it for ourselves and the people that we love, right? And so again, I just want to say thank you. I'm excited about the direction that we're going, and y'all certainly have played a large part in that, so.
Thank you.
Kyle Campbell, come on down. And then after Kyle, we have Dan Dalinka. Welcome back to Kyle. Kyle, welcome back to council. Again, if you could state your name, any organizations you represent, you have 3 minutes.
My name is Kyle Campbell, and I'm a resident of Southern Orchards, a streetcar suburb in the near south side. I'm a member of Transit Columbus and Yay Bikes, and I'm also a board member of Bikes for All People, a nonprofit bike shop on Parsons Avenue. I wanted to speak specifically about Parsons Avenue, a place that is in dire need of a complete streets overhaul. For context, Parsons Avenue is a vital corridor that borders several neighborhoods, partially because of the streetcar line that used to connect the south side to the rest of the city. Today, it still has multiple transit lines that go along and across it, and many businesses of all sorts. However, the simple act of crossing the street is extremely dangerous due to the traffic that the streetcar lines were torn up to accommodate. Some improvements were made to Parsons in 2017, including a rectangular rapid flashing beacon on Beck Street, curb extensions at several crosswalks, and a reduction from 4 lanes to 2 with a middle turning lane. I'm aware that an additional RRFB will be installed in the future, but I can tell you that this will not prevent people from getting hit by reckless drivers at these locations. However, for some reason, multiple traffic signals were removed between Livingston and Whittier Street, which served as the only way to guarantee drivers would actually stop so that pedestrians could safely cross the street. I'm the main organizer of the group rides at Bikes for All People, which we host every Thursday at 7 p.m. I would want nothing more than to be able to lead a ride along the length of Parsons Avenue, but that could very well lead to the unnecessary deaths of people that I'm directly responsible for the safety of. Even crossing Parsons, especially with the group, is prohibitively difficult due to the lack of traffic signals previously mentioned. The only bicycle infrastructure that currently exists on Parsons Avenue are share the road signs and stencils of bicycles in the middle of the lane. These encourage cyclists, at least those brave enough like me, to ride in the middle of the lane, where it is safest, as there is a middle lane that can be used for passing when it is safe to do so. Nevertheless, I am frequently yelled at and punished fast, where a driver intentionally passes closely in order to intimidate me, even when I'm riding at the speed limit with my e-bike. I was very disappointed to see that there are no plans to add actual bicycle infrastructure to Parsons Avenue as part of Bike Plus, even though multiple people have been hit or killed riding bicycles on it. I myself have recorded multiple close calls and typically only ride on Parsons if I am in a hurry or want to demonstrate how dangerous it is. As a pedestrian, Parsons Avenue is even more dangerous. The stretch of Parsons from Livingston to Whittier Avenue is 35 miles per hour and funnels traffic from the nearby interstates directly into a business district. I have to cross the street in order to get to Planks Cafe, Parsons North Brewing Company, the Fitness Loft, or anywhere in German Village. Even if I cross the street at the rectangular rapid flashing beacon on Beck Street, drivers will blatantly break the law and nearly hit me as I cross, often swerving around me and my wife rather than yielding. This is even more egregious when legally crossing at the numerous unmarked crosswalks. I am able-bodied enough to be able to literally jump out of the way of these reckless drivers, but it is frankly absurd that I even have to. Parsons Avenue does not have to be this way. For one, according to the Ohio Revised Code 4511.21, Parsons Avenue is a business district because, quote, 50% or more of the frontage for a distance of 300 feet or more is occupied by buildings in use for business, unquote. Because of this, the City of Columbus has discretion to set speed limits lower than 35 miles per hour, as was done where we are standing now, downtown. Moreover, the speed limit on Parsons is already 25 miles per hour south of Whittier, and I see no reason why it can be done north of Whittier. Additionally, in the context of this hearing, Parsons needs a complete street overhaul. Lanes should be narrowed to the minimum that allows for buses to travel and no more. The middle turning lane is currently used as a passing lane by reckless drivers and needs to have pedestrian islands installed with curbs and bollards where possible. Every crosswalk across Parsons should be at the very least painted with high visibility markers. Ideally, these should be raised crosswalks with curb extension, but paint is much cheaper than concrete. Protected bike lanes should be added with the space freed up by the lanes being narrowed, because it is insulting to expect people to share the road with those who see anything slower than them as an obstacle to heckle and intimidate, instead of a fellow human being with places to be. In general, I would say that the Livingston Avenue project could be equally applied to Parsons, but needs short-term improvements more than anything else. I fully support complete streets because Parsons is currently a dividing line of the south side rather than a focal point that it deserves to be. That's all.
Thank you. I would like to, Brian or Swid, is there anything, are there plans for Parsons Avenue? Are there things that we're looking at to improve, or to address some of the concerns along the Parsons Avenue corridor?
Hi, Kyle. Nice to see you. I just wanted to say one of the reasons that we actually ended up not adding Parsons to the Bike Plus network is because of the Bike Boulevard network that runs north and south along it. Also because some of the most recent projects along Parsons have not been that old. Frankly, there are other locations around the city that would be seeing investment before we would rip out what was just done in recent years. We know that we've learned a lot in the last, not only City of Columbus, but the nation has learned a lot in the last 10 years about what good bike infrastructure is, and we will continue to be improving that around the city. I think one of the parts, again, about why we chose an alternate route around Parsons was to avoid some of those more constrained conditions that exist on Parsons today.
And when we think about aside from Bike Plus, even for the pedestrian concerns around that, are there things that we're looking at? Is that something that we're thinking about for the future, something that we've heard more residents talk about?
We've definitely heard a lot about Parsons in the past. I think, one short-term example was the rapid flash beacon being added that you mentioned. I think we'll continue to monitor that as we go along. If we are seeing that it's being utilized, or if there are other modifications to curb bump outs or others that we could help reduce travel speeds, that would be helpful. I wasn't aware of that business district anecdote, so I think I'll be looking into that a little more and see if there's more we can do along those lines. So thanks for bringing that.
Which we also, because of the designation of downtown, that gave us the ability as a city to lower the speed limits. And so that's something that I know that we have been talking about with the department, of looking at where there are other opportunities in the city that we can lower speed. So that's a continuing conversation that we're having together.
ODOT is having a very similar conversation as well. They're starting to institute a pilot project about making posted speed limit changes a little bit easier than it is today. So they're piloting that now, to which we're trying to see where we might be able to do that around the city as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle, for being here. So Dan Dalinka is next, and then we have Mr. Boffman after. Welcome to council.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dan Dalinka, and I live in Italian Village. I'm a member of Transit Columbus, and I'm happy to see the efforts of council and MORPC to begin to address our unsafe streets and unpleasant streets, really, that are present in every single neighborhood in Columbus. As the city considers implementing complete streets policy, I'm excited for a more comfortable and safe walking experience, biking experience, and for that infrastructure to be more consistent throughout the city. Additionally, streets that are quieter, more accessible, accommodating to all will help build wealth, attract housing and businesses in ways they really can't right now in their current state. No one likes to live on a loud and dangerous street where they can't cross the street, bike in their neighborhood, etc. And making our streets complete for all users will really attract people and make our communities more pleasant places to be, live, exist. In addition to better sidewalks, bus and bike lanes, I asked you to consider formally incorporating design elements that make a good street into a great street, including large street trees, benches in appropriate areas, urban roundabouts, pedestrian refuge islands, and reducing existing wide roads and long crossing distances. Those are just some of the details I would suggest including into our definition of complete street. Anyone that moves around the city knows there's a lot of work to be done to alter these streets in every single neighborhood. I urge the city to fund and implement complete streets policy as soon as possible and move quickly to implement short and long-term solutions on as many as main streets as feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for joining us. And there was a piece here that I wanted to pick up on. I know with that Sullivan Avenue project, there were some other things that we implemented that were like arterial, if you will, to, with the street bump outs, lighting under the bridge. I think we put in like a little kind of like a standing kind of hangout area over by one of the bump outs, right? There's probably a much better name for it, but or seating or that sort of thing. Is that something that we are considering, depending upon where we may be talking about, which intersection or road or corridor?
Absolutely. I think I've mentioned it 4 times already, but they don't all look the same. Even a bunch of our research with NACTO peer cities, there are 30 different approaches to how a different community might tackle a Sullivan Avenue. We will continue to learn from those to see how we might better look at a Parsons Avenue, or even though a decision we might have made 8 years ago or 15 years ago to what that design looks like today, we might not, or we likely would not take that same approach, in 2024. So we'll continue to do the same as we look to, as you said, make our streets better and more consistent. I like that.
One other side note and PSA I would like to put out there is we also do have a program called 614 Beautiful, and the original intent, well, not the original, it's still the intention of 614 Beautiful is to create beautiful spaces and communities. And one thing that we've seen with 614 Beautiful is there is a bridge lighting project that we're helping to fund. There is, adding in benches, adding in more bike parking, et cetera, that we've seen as part of those 614 projects. So I think that it's like a beautiful marriage of some of what we're talking about, right? That some of what we'll do with the complete streets is the structure itself, and then what that looks like around it is where communities can then decide. So you and your neighbors or an organization can then get together and think about how you want to make a specific intersection, especially I think about some of the intersections with those bump outs, a place that feels more like a gathering place for folks, right? That we can put those in. And we started 614 Beautiful before we got way into thinking about transit. It was my first year on council that we started it, and we can already start to see the overlay of some of these longer term projects with some of the 614 projects that we're creating, pocket parks and other things. So I think it is we have lots of tools and strategies in the toolkit to achieve the goals that we all want to achieve for our neighborhoods. But I want to thank you for being here, and thank you for coming down today. Mr. Boffman, and then to round us out, we have David Brandt. Mr. Boffman, welcome to council. Or I should say, welcome back to council. I'm sure you've been here many times.
Thank you. I'm Milt Boffman. I'm a resident on East Broad Street. I'm not representing any organization specifically, but I want to thank you, Councilperson, for this update, and thank MORPSI representatives and representatives of the City Public Service and Transportation Department, because this has been very helpful in understanding the complete streets. And as a resident, I certainly endorse what we're trying to accomplish, what the city is trying to accomplish here. My one concern is, and it's a major concern, is that I've heard a lot of support from organizations around the city, but I haven't heard of feedback from neighborhoods that are impacted by the bike lanes specifically. And that's my major concern, is the bike lanes and the impact on Broad Street between Nelson Road and Parsons Avenue, which is I'm sure you're aware, highly residential area where the street parking is used and there's very limited parking available off-street. And I hope that we can have a way for neighborhoods that are impacted by bike lanes to have feedback in this process. I'm not against bike lanes by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to be sure that it's thoughtful in terms of the design and how it impacts particularly those neighborhoods that have historic characteristics, like around Franklin Park, and that those historic characteristics aren't compromised by bike lane development. But again, I really appreciate it. I don't want to get into the weeds about specific areas, but I think this has been a very good discussion. I think the input's been very good, and I hope that we will know how neighborhoods, residents and neighborhoods that are going to be impacted by bike lanes can provide input, suggestions, and ideas.
So, Brian, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you could talk first generally around how we engage whenever we're doing a roadway project with the neighborhood. Secondly, if you could share Broad Street specific, because Broad Street is unique in terms of what we're doing, especially when you think about the intentionality and helping us to decide how we implement a change, such as road dieting or other strategies.
Sure. Nice to see you, Mr. Boffman, and thank you for the comments. Yes, overarching, we do go out and talk to folks in the neighborhood. So, for example, the Mount Vernon project I mentioned earlier, we had a public meeting. That's been I think, 3-year-long engagement process with that community. We would do similar in other areas that we have an upcoming project to get feedback not only on what the facility type should be, what the extents are, what side of the road it should be on, those type of things. I think moving forward as part of Bike Plus, I would even like to test more projects like we actually did on East Broad. The image I shared earlier was a test that we did, a one-day event that a council member was at to come and ride and give us feedback on if it should be here on this side of the road, how wide it should be, and so forth. I think having those tangible tests will give us feedback on what should and shouldn't be in place. Most specifically on East Broad, that is a 1-year test that we'll be doing to inform longer-term investment along the East Broad corridor, which does sit on the high injury network, or the HIN. So we know that it is important for us to make changes to that corridor. Even just last night, we were at the PACT meeting over in the Bronzeville neighborhood. We'll be.
Can you let folks know what that is?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. Do you know what? Partners Achieving Community Transformation. Thank you very much. I knew that right off the bat. So we'll be at PACT, I can't repeat it, and we'll be at the Near East Side Area Commission here next month to also have similar conversations. Most specifically on East Broad, we sent out letters to all residents along the corridor, such as yourself, Mr. Boffman. We've also started, even just this past week, although we haven't been able to email, we've been calling stakeholders along the corridor to better understand what the constraints are for those areas. We've been conducting parking counts over the course of the last month and a half and have seen a very small percentage of parking utilization, much lower than most parts of the city. I think it's only around 3% of the corridor is parked. So that's not to say that those 3% don't still rely on that corridor, and we want to better understand how we can maybe look at surrounding side streets or others to be able to make those needs met. But that 1 year, we will be collecting feedback not only from people like yourself, Mr. Boffman, but there will be a survey up that will be collecting feedback from communities along the corridor. I think it's 2 miles or 1.9 miles, as well as our own staff. Like, what does it even look like to maintain that? What are the materials end up looking like? Is it ugly? You know, like those are the types of things that we want to hear from folks like yourselves and others. So again, we hope that this is really just the start of that conversation, because there are going to be much bigger investments in the future as we look to really rethink what East Broad looks like and not just what's within the curb line today.
No, that's helpful. So we can expect surveys and then also focus groups potentially to get input from the neighbors.
That's correct.
At this point, other than the letter that was sent out last month, there is, very few people in the neighborhood know about the plan. So that was a big help getting that letter out.
Yep, and I think we'll continue to do that stakeholder outreach. We just started that really this week in earnest with calling stakeholders along the area. But, we'd like to come to places like your condo board association or others and have this same type of conversation to help answer questions.
And I think the other thing I want to point out is that, a year-long pilot is almost unheard of. And y'all, in the 3 years that I've been, which is nothing in the lifespan of public service or the history of Columbus, but we have not done this. And so I think the uniqueness of the opportunity for us to really intentionally think about, especially a street like Broad Street, that is a main thoroughfare for our community to think about. I do want to reiterate this. The streets are not just made for cars, and that's a reality. You heard it here from Warpsy. Again, I shared this earlier. Every single city across, every municipality across the state is dealing with the same thing, where we are thinking about how do we make our roadways more accessible to everyone, no matter how you move on the road. So whether you're in a car, whether you're walking, whether you're biking, whether you're scooting, if even for folks who are on mobility devices, right, that they have the opportunity to feel just as safe as everyone else does. And so I think this is a different mentality for our city in the way that we're moving. But I think that, giving us a 1 year span to really look at and think about what this looks like with community input, I think is just going to be key for us. And so we have this opportunity now with these infrastructure dollars to have this grant, which felt probably very quick for the community, which is not usually a thing with roadway projects, but it just gave us this opportunity to have this time to think about what the longer term impact will look like. So again, thank you for being down here. Thank you for continued conversation. Mr. Brandt, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is David Brandt. Thank you for having me. I live at 1670 East Broad Street, which is between Brunson and Woodland, and that's going to be part of the Broad Street extension of the bike trail. When I moved in 4 years ago, we had access to parking on the street. We had adequate parking for the occupants of the building, but that was it. Now, if the bike trail takes up the parking, there is no parking. The closest parking will be 2 blocks away. There's been no accommodation, at least that I'm aware of, for that or even thought about it. If you read the complete streets policy, you'll find the words accessibility and safety more than 20 times. And I think if you use those words and apply it to the residents that I'm familiar with, you will find that they don't help the residents, they don't live up to what happens to the residents. Section 1 says that complete streets facilities are implemented, operated, and maintained in a manner so that people of all ages, incomes, and abilities can use them safely. But if there's no parking for the people, they aren't going to be able to use them safely, because you, as I'm going to explain in a minute, you can't have an 80-year-old walk 2 blocks and not expect someone to fall and get hurt. There has to be some solution to that. 18% of the people in the United States are over 65, 4% in Ohio are over 80. Many of those people can't walk 2 blocks, as I mentioned. So they don't have accessibility. If you read sections 1 and 2, ensuring and guaranteeing accessibility and safety, if you check the vision statement, section 2, does this bike path enhance the quality of life for me, my guests, and other people? I'm 83. It also is supposed to assure the delivery of goods and movement of goods without causing serious injury. But for these people, it would be impossible. They couldn't carry their groceries 2 blocks. It's impossible. Section 4 says that Morrissey will ensure all projects throughout the region and will accommodate people using all modes of transportation. Now, what about the elderly? How does that apply to them? The bike path does not accommodate the elderly. It makes it more dangerous for them because they have to do all this walk. It's going to be impossible for them, is what it amounts to. Section 5 policy, if you look at subsections 2, 3, 4, 5, every project shall be designed to optimize level of comfort and safety for the people who are most vulnerable, with consideration due to consideration of all issues such as accessibility, function, connectivity. Section 5, policy number 3, people of all ages, abilities shall be accommodated during the entire life cycle of the project. Section 5, number 4, safety will be prioritized for people who are most vulnerable. Well, who are going to be more vulnerable than the elderly or the handicapped? Section 5, number 8, ensures sufficient accommodation for transit vehicles and access to transit facilities. I don't know what this means for emergency vehicles. Will they have to block the only west lane of Broad Street to do their job? The elderly have to, will the elderly have to cross the bike lane to get to the bus? I don't know that. I'm sure you've got plans for that. About 1 to 2 months ago, I received a brochure from the city, and it said that, and I know you had the meeting yesterday, it said that you changed, you did change, I assume, the zoning restrictions, and you were going to zone according to need. Well, you will have taken all our parking away, but there's going to be no accommodation for it.
Mr. Brandt, there's a couple, you mentioned many things here. I want to ensure that a couple things. We're going to do continued public engagement. We're also happy to have a separate meeting to go through because there's many things in here that you mentioned. I want to ensure that as we wrap up, there are just a couple things I do want to ensure that we address. First and foremost, there is parking for the residents who live in the building.
Yes, I said that.
Okay, so there is accommodations for people who live in the building to be able to park. The concern is for people who are visiting. Correct. I just want to ensure that I have it correct.
Concern is going to be for people who are visiting and for services that are needed.
Sure. So I'm going to answer the service question, and I want to answer both the emergency question and the service question. First and foremost, we would never do a roadway project or do anything that would inhibit our emergency services from being able to access buildings. That is against our code. Please, folks from the Department of Public Service, correct me if I'm wrong.
You are absolutely correct. We would not
I assume
And,
that.
and the fire would never let us do anything, or emergency would never let us do anything that was not accessible, because I do believe in the building in question, there is a turnabout as well that they can turn into, correct?
And no, there's
No?
no
Okay.
turnaround. But
Well,
it was-
so, and then secondly, in terms of packages being delivered or other things being delivered, can you just talk about that? And then accessibility in terms of crossing, where, in the sections where there would be a crosswalk and there's a continuous bike lane, can you just give us like high level? I know that this is like in design, it would not be decisions that would be made today, but can you just address that?
Yes, we would be adding crosswalks, specifically in the area that he's talking about across Broad Street. And then for access to bus, we've been working with CODA since the inception of this process to ensure CODA service would remain. The CODA stop and the bike lane would actually share space at the stop locations so that people with accessibility needs would still be able to access bus service as they do today.
Sure. So, Mr. Brandt, one thing I would, if you want to hang out for just a second, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet our team from Public Service, we'd be happy to make that introduction. And again, I think this is just part of the very, very beginning of our public engagement as we have conversations with residents who, especially the residents that are going to be most impacted by the Broad Street project. So I thank you for being here today.
I'd like to make one more statement.
Sure.
And that statement is that the result of what I see, if it's the way it's planned to be, that what you're going to do for the people is trap them in their homes, the elderly. You're going to trap them in their homes because they'll have no other choice. So something has to be worked out so that that doesn't happen.
Thank you, and I thank you for that. I think that is something that we are certainly taking into consideration. I don't think that removing parking from Broad Street and relocating that someplace else is trapping people in their homes, but that's something that we can certainly talk about. I am not an engineer. The Department of Public Service is, and I know that as we think about our projects and that's what our conversation today was about, was thinking about the safety of our folks. Vision Zero is about the safety of our folks and thinking about how we are making our streets safer for everyone, both from, again, a pedestrian standpoint, a cycling standpoint, a scooting standpoint, a driving standpoint, both for young people, both for our older folks. We've seen that even in the reduction of speed in downtown. Part of that strategy was because we know that the changing speeds down to 25 is a life-saving measure for folks in our community. So I want to thank you for being here today. We will continue to have public engagement with you. Again, I know that this was a hard time for folks to come down, but want to just thank you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for today. Thanks, everyone, for hanging in through our technology challenges. Again, I know 2 o'clock on a Friday is not the optimum time for us to have this hearing, but we wanted to move some things along to ensure that we were timely in our approach as we think about open streets, and both from MORPC adopting to then Public Service to get this out to people. I highly encourage for folks who are here to share this public hearing so that folks can see it. We want to have continued conversations and engagement with our community. I'm actually starting restarting a biking series. So I hope to see you on a bike near somewhere in the community very, very soon. I also want to close by saying, as a younger person myself, because parking downtown, even many, many years ago for my first job, was very expensive. And so I parked at a much cheaper lot and had quite a walk to get to that lot. And when I was crossing the street with a light, with a walk signal, was struck by a car. And even though this happened in my 20s, 20-some years later, I still suffer from those injuries. And so this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. The streets that we are talking about are streets that we all travel every day. Broad Street is how I get to work, to this building every day. And so when I think about the safety of our people, it is something each one of us could have a transit story. Each one of us could have a story of when we've crossed the street or biked or have had someone that we love who has been impacted by being a car-centric city, a city that relies solely on a car. And with the growth that is coming to Columbus, we have to remove the idea that a car is the only way for someone to move about the city. We have to become people-centric and thinking about the safety of our people and giving them options for how they move, especially as we talk about a zoning code, which we haven't passed yet. It is something that will come up on this Monday's meeting, but you can't think about housing without thinking about transportation. And as we try to alleviate the pressure on our housing system by giving us a break within that zoning code, we then have to turn our attention to transportation and what are the things that we're doing. With bringing in LinkUs, it helps to move people more quickly, more efficiently, safely. It takes more cars off the road, so it helps our environment and the air that we breathe. It helps to ensure that we don't have more cars on the road, but it also is the infrastructure around all of that. So more sidewalks, truly protected bike lanes, trails that connect folks. So even if you live in the further outskirts or near the suburbs, you can get into the city. And these are the decisions that we have before us as a city, as a growing city. There is immense opportunity, and there are also big challenges. But as we think about the investment that each one of us make in this community, we have to consider not only the Columbus of today, but the Columbus of tomorrow, and the 2 million some new neighbors that we will someday have. And so I want to thank everyone for being here today, whether you are an advocate, which we should all be, an advocate for safety, whether you are with public service, whether you are one of our partners. Thank you all for being here today and for testifying. I want to thank our staff, Jessica Casares and Amaris Lemus, and I also want to give a shout out to our intern, who is a cycling advocate himself. It was his last day yesterday. We will miss him immensely, but he is moving over to the Department of Public Service, and we're so excited for him. So, Talavia and Sprit Sims, thank you for preparing us today for this, and I wish you the best of luck. And with that, that concludes today's hearing. Thank you all so much.